Hello, my name is Meerah and I am a Lorekeeper in one of Yggdrasil's libraries. And today I wanted to share with you the story of Vaha, the architect of Vahmalkea, the desert biome of Atoraxxion. I'm just going to be reading Vaha's records verbatim, so this will be in first person. So yeah, I hope you enjoy. I recall my oldest memory. Before I was brought to Atoraxxion by my master, I broke my spine after being trampled by a horse. Even as I was losing consciousness, I remember thinking about how much I wanted to live. I thought I had died, but when I was able to open my eyes again, I found myself quite alive and next to a strange structure with a man. He called himself Dekia, and he told me that he would give me a new purpose. My mission was to save the world from the Black Death. At first, I didn't believe him or understand him, but as I explored Atoraxxion, I began to realize that the threat was actually very real, and yet I had doubts if I could complete this great mission that he had entrusted to me. However, as I continued to apply my master's teachings, I found myself quite adept at weapons crafting. At times, I asked my master how the weapons worked. While he told me that he couldn't bestow strict knowledge to just one of his pupils, I noticed that he began to look on my victories in the gladios with growing interest. Lest we should ever forget our common goal, our master had us craft slates. They stood for unity, solidarity, trust, and friendship. Our master instructed us to place our slates in our most favorite of spots within our biomes. Thinking of the future, I placed my slate just in front of the innermost sanctum, a location I pass every time I set off to work. This was to remind myself that I did this tireless work in order to one day create the ultimate weapon. To minimize the damage incurred from the Dark Invaders, I made it known to the master countless times that I needed more knowledge. Despite working so hard all the time, he still thinks me unready. I complained to Ors, but she told me not to worry as she took me in her arms. This was the first time I had been comforted by Ors. Normally it was I who had to tend to her because she was scared or distressed. While she appeared tough on the outside, I knew just how fragile she could be. Oftentimes, when I sat by the lake I'd made for her, Ors would come to me and rest her head on my knees. She's right, I need to wait a while longer. I know my master will acknowledge my efforts. The master began to open up to me as the last stages of the construction of my biome need an end. I was having trouble making the energy dispersion hexahedron work when he appeared without notice and started to help me. I am only helping you now as the day draws ever near when you must leave this place for the outside world. From that day on, he not only answered my queries thoroughly, but also taught me in all the fields he knew I was interested in. Sika was the only other Decima who took note of his words. I was proud of Sika for doing so, and I taught him much of what I knew as well. Soon, Sika started to make weapons that were similar to mine, but they seemed incomplete. Sika's weapons were powerful, yet overheated and broke down easily. For the first time tomorrow, I will depart Atoraxxion for Vahmalkea. I've heard of its unbearable climate, a scorching heat that liquefies your skin, searing sands that burn the flesh on your very feet. Will I be able to recreate such an environment? I will also need to devise new weapon designs. Up until now, I had designed my weapons based on the movements of my own body. However, Master told me that there are countless more creatures in the outside world to mimic. Some creatures have joints that bend in the opposite direction of ours, while others have long, extended tails. The very first thing I ever saw in the outside world was a bird. I was impressed to see it spread its wings nearly twice its size and soar in the sky. When I caught one and held it in my hand, I was also surprised at how light it was relative to its size. I can't comprehend how such a tiny creature has enough energy to keep its wings flapping constantly. Life is miraculous in and of itself. Is there no end to this desert? The more I continue my journey, the fewer plants and living creatures I see. I press on, reminding myself that I must endure if I am to design new weapons based on the creatures that survive in these worst of climates. And yet I grow more and more discouraged as all I encounter are piles and piles of bones. Only the small lizards that greet me under the shade help me realize that I'm not dead yet. How long have I been walking? I found a desert clock flying flat on top of a sand dune. Unsure if it was alive or not, I approached it, only to see it raise its head to meet my gaze, then lay back down. It seemed weak. I offered some meat and water, which it devoured ravenously before darting out of sight. It was sometime after it had left and I had nearly reached the bottom of the dune that I realized the desert fox and what could only be her pups were trailing behind me. I stood motionless as they approached me, looking up with pleading eyes. I slowly began to realize why the mother had brought her pups to me. They were famished. When I took out some food, they dove straight towards my hands. My heart warmed at the sight of them filling their bellies, but I knew I couldn't rest here. I still had a long way to go. If the foxes continue following me to the journey's end, then I'll consider taking them back with me to Atoraxxion. I shall create a small microcosm in Atoraxxion identical to Vahmalkea. And who knows, maybe even desert foxes like these shall flourish. It's certainly an amusing thought. first city I encountered utilized many different devices to overcome their dismal condition. I was amazed to see how they used tracks to move objects so quickly. If you can distinctly visualize how weapons function without going through the rigmarole of detailed analysis, you will have much more time to actually invest in crafting said weapons. When this thought came to mind, I immediately drew a design in my head. Kvelen hexahedrons that move through 2 rows of tracks, weapons that stop and start operations as they scan for the remnants of the Dark Invaders via the Kvelen hexahedrons. If this thought is carried out in Vahmalkea, we will be able to tell the moment a weapon is made if it's operational or faulty. Only then shall I be able to focus all of my energy into making weapons. My master, Ors, Sika, and Yolu will be overjoyed with this news. We were all reunited at Atoraxxion once more. I told them about the tracks and the device I thought of. The other Dekimas, however, just shook their heads. They didn't understand why we needed more devices when we already had Kvelen hexahedrons set up in different sites around Atoraxxion. In the end, I alone designed the tracks for myself, thus improving the movement of Kvelen hexahedrons. I suppose the other Dekimas are already at it, making new weapons. However, they will come to realize just how useful these tracks are once I'm done with this task. When that time comes, I'm confident that the other Dekimas will fight over one another to get their tracks installed. I've completed the system to transfer the Kvelen hexahedrons. Upon completion, I thought how convenient it would be to create a device to transport people. However, creating a new set of tracks would require much more space, and thus limit the amount of space to make weapons within. It was to my great excitement then, when I found a blueprint for a moving disc in the textbook the master had left behind. I didn't need to rely on the tracks anymore, and it was wide enough to carry and transport humans. Gladios is approaching, but I decided to make this device anyway. I can make the weapons later. Once I've got a concrete system working, I may not even have to rush. Before we left for the outside world, Ors was always curious to know what I was working on, and would often come visit me in Vahmalkea. And yet, as of late, she hasn't visited me at all, and she always looks like something is troubling her. Whenever I ask, she simply drops her head and remains silent. I'm worried that something bad is about to occur. Did something happen to Ors when she visited Orzechia? Seeing how Yolu looks upon Ors with concern in her eyes, I know Ors has yet to tell anyone. I want to be with Ors and comfort her, but my task is still unfinished. I cannot betray the master who has placed this much trust in us. I'm sure Ors will tell me everything when the time is right. After all, we've been friends since we were little. Sika wanted to talk to me after Yolu and Ors returned to their biomes. I thought it strange of him to ask to see me alone, but he urged me to be quick about it as Dekia was waiting. His words were direct and to the point. Did you know? Ors is a traitor. She'll bring disaster upon Atoraxxion. He told me to go to Ors's paradise and see it for myself, telling me that there was a statue within, an idol, dedicated to the goddess of darkness. Before leaving for the outside world, the master had told me that there were no such thing as gods. Believing in the existence of such beings would mean denying ourselves the power to control our own life. Hence, we should not rely on gods or goddesses to protect us. That believing in deities meant we'd become weak at heart. And yet, I was worried. Knowing Sika, he would normally have told Dekia immediately of Ors's betrayal to get her in trouble. Why did he only inform me? When I asked him this question, Sika grinned slyly and just walked away. It was the same dirty look he had adopted ever since his return from the outside world. I hadn't left my biome since the moon had passed over Vahmalkea's heart. However, after listening to what Sika told me, I had to see the truth for myself. Wandering through Ors's biome, I saw everything Sika had said was true. Statues of the Dark Goddess were erected everywhere. When I turned around, Ors was behind me, tears streaming down her face. When I asked why she was crying, she broke down and told me everything she had been keeping from me, said I endured it all for you. It was then that I saw the parchment on the table. It seemed to detail the workings of my weapons, yet to my trained eye it was clear the information had been falsified. Notes in Sika's own hand littered the margins, including one instructing Ors to find out more. She had purposefully misfed this information to Sika to prevent my weapon schematics falling into his hands. The moment I realized this, I knew that I couldn't blame Ors, for she was merely being used by Sika. I needed to reassure her of my feelings. It's okay, I understand. You don't have to hide it from me anymore. Hearing those words, Ors looked up. Then she slowly drew near and embraced me. How dare Sika try to use his friends for his own gain? I knew that Sika had grown twisted, but never to such an extent. I need to keep my distance from him and protect Ors. Sika is trying to turn the Dekimas against one another, and yet, be it good or bad, all the other Dekimas still seem to maintain a strong bond of trust. However, if Sika is not with us until the end, it will be impossible to achieve our goal. All of us Dekimas have to work together until the final moment comes. Even if our current bond with Sika is like a tower built upon a rift, all of us, the master included, will be in danger if even one of us gives up. Thus, I need to focus harder on my research to design even stronger weapons. Sika never came. Consequently, the last Gladios was cancelled because of his absence. While Dekia tried to reassure us that Sika had been amassing materials for his weapons, and must simply have lost track of time, expressions of deep concern creased across each of our faces. Ors appeared lost in much thought, and kept to herself. On the day of the final battle, I led my legion of weapons, as I had been trained to do my entire life. Outside, as the master had foretold, dark invaders appeared from the sky. Those caught unprepared for the invasion began to attack one another, influenced by the invaders' dark power. Sika still hadn't returned, and the final Gladios has still yet to be held. As such, there was no signs of the 100,000 Ator. The dark invaders were relentless, and my numbers were dwindling. Looking around, not one of the other Dekima's weapons could be found. Where in the world was Sika? What about Yolu? Why didn't Ors send me her weapons? Did she forget our promise to meet on the final day? What about everything she told me up until now? Did they all really want the world to end? What's going on? Fighting the dark invaders alone without the army of Ator was futile. Pushed back, I retreated to Atoraxxion and saw that the Blackstone, the source of our power, had vanished. Moreover, I discovered that Dekia had lost his memories and was recreating Atoraxxion from scratch, all over again. Ors and Yolu appeared shortly afterwards, with Sika and his legion of weapons. Sika was furious, adamant that I need to listen to him. But could I even trust his words? Had he just betrayed the master? Was Sika responsible for the loss of Dekia's memories and the disappearance of the Blackstone? When I told him of my suspicions, he strongly denied it, of course. Then he turned and pointed his finger at Ors. Ors is responsible for this. I warned you that she had disobeyed the master's teachings and was worshipping an idol. Why won't you listen to me? Ors stayed silent at Sika's accusations. Yolu also didn't argue. Instinctively, I came to Ors's defense. That's not true. Ors truly needs both the Master and Dekia. Almost immediately, both Sika and Ors stared at me in suspicion. The army of Ators must be offered to the Goddess of Darkness. The last Gladios must be held. Ors has nothing to do with the loss of Dekia's memories or the disappearance of the Blackstone. Yolu scoffed and then replied, I get it now, Vaha. You're trying to blame us for your defeat at the hands of the Dark Invaders, aren't you? Preposterous. I was the only one who had actually fought with my legions, and suddenly it was my fault that I failed? Then Sika, with his sly, stupid grin, said, How does it feel to finally taste defeat after enjoying all those victories? I'm all too familiar with how you're feeling right now. Just return the Blackstone to its place. Have I not returned to resolve this very matter? My head was spinning. None took my side. I held on to what little hope I had and shouted, Ors! Yet she did not utter a single word. The only one who could prove my innocence. Her mouth remained shut, condemning me. I struggled to keep my wits about me. I wasn't the one you truly loved. It was the Goddess of Darkness who truly found a place in your heart. Is that not so? Ors kept her silence, head down, quietly shedding tears. I felt the fury build up inside of me. I unsheathed my blade, glaring at Ors standing across from me. Sika and Yolu were alarmed and yelled at me to stop. Before Sika could beckon his legion, my sword thrust through the air and found its target. They were all stunned, and Talabre's door, with the sword deeply embedded in it, had stopped working. If there is no way to fight off the Dark Invaders together, then we may all die together instead, I said. I pulled out my sword once more and tore the Vahmalkea log into pieces. Any thought of cooperating with the other Dekimas was gone. They couldn't care less about the knowledge I had. All they needed was someone to resent and blame. I've rid Vahmalkea of the remnants of the past, and yet this feeling remains the same. Yolu and Sika, I understand, but Ors had made a promise that her legions and mine would fight off the Dark Invaders together. I do not understand why Ors chose to look on at the Dark Invaders. I knew she worshipped the Goddess of Darkness, but I do not understand why she couldn't keep our promise. I threw the letter and token she gave me into the corner. I have no need for them anymore. If this keeps up, I might well go insane. I feel like I'm being judged by the objects around me. How dare you come back after losing to the Dark Invaders? You think you're still worthy? I had fled to Vahmalkea to avoid facing my failures. Everyone, including the Master, had turned against me, even though I was the only one who actually fought the Dark Invaders, believing that if I did not, the world would end. And yet, look at me now. I looked at Lucretia, whom I had designed after my former lover. I think I caught a hint of sadness in her smile, as she sat atop Urukio's back. Oh, if only I could turn back time and lead Ors down the right path. We cannot remain complacent. We need to hang on until Dekia regains his memory and finishes recreating Atoraxxion. Only then can we atone for our mistakes. We must complete a Kaiv and wait for the right time to come. Like the Master told us, we will arise and fight off the Dark Invaders when they reawaken. We just might be able to use the Master's Kevelian hexahedron to make a Kiv. I've still yet to fully understand its workings, but I do have some experiences in modifying Kevelian hexahedrons. Even if it's an impossible task, we must still try. That is the only way we can carry out our destiny. After gathering my thoughts, I began thinking of plans one by one. first I must persuade the other Decimus. I cannot do this on my own. Whew. And that's where Vaha's record ends. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you next time here in the library.